Hey there, internets. So, got one coming up here, and this is a bill that it's specific to Washington, but this kind of thing goes on with other things. And I'm just gonna say, conservatives, just because somebody's want to put up multifamily housing, does not mean they're trying to take your single family residence away. Yes, there are those kind of people with the World Economic Forum that will have put out things like you will own nothing and you will be happy. Yes, there are people that want you to live in the pods and eat the bugs. I'm not one of them, and a lot of people that also aren't. But we do have a housing problem, and it's called not building enough units. Now, yes, one of those solutions to that is to allow more land to be developed. But then you get places like Seattle. People move in, but there's no place for them to live. You need multifamily housing and more of it. And so I get this email about HB 167, which I think originates, it was a forward from two different friends. But at the bottom it says, this bill creates another grant program and work group, in this case to help counties and cities adopt multiplex housing units. And this is, they are trying to move us away from single-family housing units and property in favor of multi-story apartments, townhouses, courtyard apartments, etc. Now, I couldn't find anywhere where it said the fiscal note would cost state and local government $4.7 million between 2023 and 2025. Now, if you're opposing it on the cost, fine. But here's what I see. This isn't noted to these two friends; it's other friends too. Someone wants to add a mother-in-law apartment and then rent it out. Someone wants to convert their detached garage into apartment and rent it out, and they oppose it. Now, again, parking issues are a legitimate complaint. But if somebody can come up with a proper plan for the parking, meaning reduce their front yard size, to add a parking space, whatever it is, reduce their backyard so they can be accessed from the alley, again, that solves the problem. That should be fine. Because here's the thing, is you got to have more density. This is a market-based solution as opposed to rent control. Okay, we don't want rent control. But what's the solution to housing? That means more housing. Ultimately, that's what solves the problem with homelessness, because of economic reasons, not because of people being drug addicts and the criminal element to begin with. Yes, there are those people who apparently don't think they need to work. So, going into this bill, of course, I had to read the bill because I wanted to see what this is really about. It doesn't say cities cannot have residential single-family homes. It doesn't say they have to rezone it and can't approve a single-family home. This actually, in some ways, could be arguable that it reduces the regulation to that as far as the builder or the future owner of that, if they don't build and sell. Section 1 just says a new section is added and gives the RCW to read as follows. Department shall develop and administer a grant program to provide direct financial assistance to counties and cities for the adoption of pre-approved middle housing plans. Now, as admin of the Skagit County Republicans, I actually put on up a couple posts about Soviet housing, where it was just like they had one design and they just kept manufacturing it like factory. That part no one's fan of, but at least this would reduce your cost, where it's like, we're going to build a bunch of townhouses and they're already approved, they're already designed, you're ready to go. Why design it twice, other than the fact that it starts to look ugly? Okay, but it allows. So again, you want to complain about the grant program? Okay. When a pre-approved plan is submitted to a county or city during the process of seeking permit approval for middle housing development, the county or city's review of the pre-approved plan might not be more than administrative. So you can't make it a political thing of, all the neighbors want to stop it. It's got to be administrative, just, hey, we're processing a building permit. For the purposes of this section, pre-approved middle housing plans mean a selection of Middle housing architectural plans that have been reviewed by the county or city code officials and approved for compliance with applicable building codes within the city, or county, or city. So these would be you've already gotten the approval for this plan design wherever you're putting it, as I understand this. Middle housing means duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, attached and detached accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, stacked flats, townhouses, or courtyard apartments. And it actually gives a definition of these of cottage housing, meaning 4 or more residential units on a lot with common open space that is either owned in common or has units owned as condominium units with property owned in common and a minimum of 20% of the lot size as open space. Courtyard apartments means 4 or more attached dwelling units arranged in two or three sides of a central courtyard or lawn area. Stacked flats mean dwelling units on a 2-story or 3-story residential building on a residential zone lot, with each floor may be separately rented or owned and is a discrete dwelling unit. And townhouses means buildings that contain 3 or more attached single-family dwelling units that extend from foundation to roof and that have a yard or public way not less than 2 sides that extends at least 50% on the length of each side of these 2 sides, which means you'd have a backyard. It's just that you're going to have a wall in common. We got some of those in Burlington. Okay? One of the towns near me, for those that are out of the state, because, hey, I'm up to 24 subscribers now, so like, share, and subscribe. So it actually gives the definition of this. These are all market-based solutions. What people have to understand is, yes, we have to have and we should have single-family residences. But even within life, my wife and I are talking on our way to Valentine's Day dinner out, and we're talking about this bill. People start off as a newborn, infant, baby, toddler, preschooler, child, adolescent, teenager, and then you become an adult. Well, your adult life, you don't go suddenly, I'm an adult, I buy a house. No, you go to college, you get a job maybe someplace away from your family where you can't live with your parents anymore, or you move out, like I did. My second place moving out was actually the apartment. I rented a house that should have been condemned as my first. And then maybe you move through several apartments. My brother is living in a duplex, I think, right now. But he's rented houses with roommates. Maybe you have roommates during that time. And then hopefully eventually you get enough to where you can get a down payment, or you get down payment assistance, and then you buy a house. Okay, even when my parents moved up here from the Klamath Valley, their last act was to get married, according to my aunt, move up to Skagit County. First 4 or 5 years living here, they lived in an apartment. So you have to have apartments. Okay? So people that sit there and say, oh, they're trying to get rid of single-family residences. Well, in a city like Seattle, they can't go out anymore. They have to go up. It's just the way it is. And you got this is in this instance, this in some way is getting government out of the way. And it still says this is residential areas and for residential purposes. This isn't quite live in the pods and eat the bugs. Okay. A new section is Section 2. It says, State Building Code Council shall convene a work group for the purpose of recommending additions or amendments to rules or codes. Blah, 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 blah. These recommendations shall include those code changes necessary to ensure public health and safety in multifamily housing under the International Residential Code. International thing, if you got a problem with an international building code, the idea of an international group, and I have not researched international building residential code, so we'll take that for what it's worth. Again, if you're opposing it because of an international code, okay. These codes should be written by the United States and by Washington, not by somebody else. In fact, if I look up international code while I'm looking at it here, international building or residential it's an international residential code. Is a comprehensive. There's 12 things you should know. Maybe I'll do something about it later, but I don't know where it comes from. But they actually have some websites if a person wants to explore that. Brace wall lines must be placed. So it has some stuff of rated separation for two family dwellings is 1 hour, whether or not a line exists between the two units. Emergency escape rules, some of those kind of things. And I am not much, to a great extent, familiar with that. But that is the standard they're talking about using here. The work group shall provide recommendations to the council at time to adopt or amend rules or codes as necessary for implementation in 2025. And then for purposes of the section, multiplex housing means a building that has up to 6 dwelling units consolidated into a single structure with common walls and floors and a functional primary street entrance, or building that is up to 3 stories containing up to 6 dwelling units consolidated into a single structure. So your max group is 6 buildings on said lot. The new section 3, this is, again, this could be an objectionable of counties planning under the relevant RCW, and cities within such counties must adopt or amend ordinance or incorporate into their development regulations and zoning regulations and other official controls the requirements of section 3 of this section to take effect July 1, 2025. In section 3, within residential, and then the next section, subsection 2 is just when they have to have it set by, and that these rules supersede any local development regulations, which arguably could be correct, but we are trying to deal with an issue, but this does kind of pull out the community groups being able to shut down any project for any reason. Oh, they're going to tear down this 600 square foot house or a bunch of 600 square foot houses and put up 12 units spread across all those lots. That kind of thing, even though the houses are almost falling down, even though they've been bought up by the developer for that purpose. Within residential areas, residential zones that allow for multiplex housing, counties and cities may not impose or require zoning, development, siting, or other standards for multiplex housing that are more restrictive than those required for detached single-family residences, except when necessary for fire and life safety. Counties and cities must apply the same development permit and environmental review process on multiplex housing that is applied to detached single-family residences. Again, it gets some regulation out of the way. You can't make it harder on one just to shut down one kind of development. As a way of saying, oh, we allow it, but it's such a pain in the butt to get it approved. Within 1/4 mile of a community core location, cities and counties may not mandate setbacks or development regulations for residential buildings that would prohibit the development from achieving the underlying zoning or density allowed, except for building codes, health and safety requirements, and public utility access and utility meter access requirements. So again, it just says you can't say, oh, you have to have setbacks that make it too much to get this much zoning in, so now it's too small to make it. Makes it too small and not make sense to even build it. You can't do that. We're going to allow 100 people in this space, but our setbacks are only going to allow you to build it for 50. You can't do that. Cities that meet the criteria may not require more than a single stairway in a residential building of 6 or fewer stories that meets the conditions outlined in the relevant subsection, in the relevant RCW. And then for purposes of this section, multiplex housing means duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, attached and detached accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, stacked flats, townhouses, and courtyard apartments. You notice that it doesn't say these massive, 300-unit apartment complexes where it's like 75 per building or something to that effect, because we got a couple of those here in Skagit County. It doesn't include those. The 6th thing is like, it'd be basically like a tower with like 2 units on every floor to get to that level with the rules that are in here. And And then it gives a list of community core locations, which includes effectively bus or train or commuter rail stops, stops on rail or fixed guideway systems, including transitway stops on bus rapid transit routes, a stop designated a major transit stop prior to the effective date of the section, public schools, and public parks, which really could turn it into everything, as opposed to saying, hey, in the areas really close to the urban development. I mean, there are some not so good spots in here. And then it gets into section 4. It has a big amendment in section 4. And this is where it says, a legislative body of a county or city in exercising authority provided in the subsection to amend the code enumerated may adopt amendments that allow for up to 5 stories of group R2 occupancy to be served by a single exit under the following conditions. And then it does include regulations, but most of these are you can't include a boarding home, does not have more than 4 dwellings on any floor. So in theory, you could have, an apartment building with 6x4 units could be 24 units in a building, which turns into a bit of a tower or some really big apartments or condos. And then it gives some rules for how many, how far your exits have to be. If you have an exterior and an interior stairway provided, a sprinkler system, some of that, which are your basic things. And then I'm not going to go through all of those because they're not all that ridiculous, other than saying you have to set for that. And at the end, it says they don't have the city doesn't. Some of the rules is the city is served by a municipal fire department or fire district. The city does not have a current restriction on development due to lack of fire flow capacity as set forth in the WAC, and it gives the number. Minimum flow capacity must be at least 750 gallons per minute for 60 minutes, as set forth in the proper Washington Administrative Code. Nothing in this subsection precludes the city from making a determination that the city does not have appropriate fire apparatus or hydrant networks to serve a single stairwell buildings. So what the city can say is, hey, we can't provide fire protection, you can't build it. End of story. So they can't force the issue and say, well, it says you have to approve it. No, you don't have to approve it in your city, and it's probably geared toward smaller towns and cities. And at the end is a new section, the Office of Regulatory Assistance shall contract with qualified external consultant or entity to develop a standard plan set demonstrating prescriptive compliance pathway that would meet or exceed all energy code regulations for residential buildings in the state, subject to the International Residential Code. The standard plan set may be used but not required by local governments and building industries to develop the standard plan set. The consultant shall, as a minimum, seek feedback from cities, counties, building industries, and building officials. And it has to be completed by the end of this year. So the message here that I would have for conservatives, if you have some issue with international building codes because you don't want another country dictating to the United States, fine. If you don't want the extra expenditure by government, fine. But if your issue is, I don't want apartments in my backyard, NIMBY doesn't go over well with me. Not in my backyard, for those that don't know what NIMBY is, doesn't work. Yes, we all say, oh, I hate all the extra people moving in, but sometimes people are coming, and you got to live with that. And I'd rather people that want to live like Seattle live in Seattle and build their apartments down there than not at all. But ultimately, allowing for these sexplexes, fourplexes, courtyard apartments, that is what we need to do. And quite frankly, I'd rather see courtyard apartments than a big tower. When I took my trip to Russia, my friend points to these 3 apartment buildings, I think, which have been torn down, and they said they called them the false teeth because they looked like something we would have built in the 70s, but I think they were built in the 80s because everything was 10 or 15 years behind us. And they were right next to an old Russian Orthodox church, and she said, "Oh yeah, during the Soviet times, they used to say, look how we have the modern next to their normal, and they look completely out of place, which is why they were called the false teeth. They didn't look like they belonged there. Rather than see a big tower in the middle of a small town, I'd rather see a courtyard apartment. But even here, there's opportunities even in towns without building that for accessory dwelling units. For someone to say, hey, I'm going to build a shop. I'd like to make it 2-story and put a little apartment above it. Parking will be provided. Can I do that? Right next to my house. I'd rather see that than people can't find a place to live because there's no apartments. There's no place to rent. Because they're going to be, and same thing with townhouses. Some people don't want to do the maintenance themselves of the buildings, but they want to own something. Townhouses, condos, those are certainly need to be options for people. So the thing I got said, mark it as a con. I might even mark it as a pro, because we got to have more housing. As opposed to the rent control bills I was talking about in a video last week or a couple weekends ago. Something like this is borderline a good bill, maybe even is a good bill, as opposed to rent control. Rent control is counterproductive. Rent control means less housing. This actually could mean more housing, maybe not the housing you want to live in. It does not look like some sort of conspiracy to force you into the pods and eating the bugs. It sounds much more like we're trying to find ways to get people to build housing that's going to fit into some of those middle areas where you can rent. You're not buying a house because you can't afford to buy a house. Nobody gets right out of high school and can afford to buy a house. Nobody gets right out of college and can automatically afford to buy a house. So it's telling people go buy a house doesn't work. They got to rent something. A lot of times, apartment's the first place to go, especially in a city. And some people might even prefer to rent. Maybe they want to move around a lot. Maybe they're only going to be in that place for a couple of years. You still got to have housing for them. But that is HB 1167. It is in the Appropriations Committee. Right now, as I'm recording this tomorrow, but it's going to be at 3 p.m., I'm going to try and set this to go live around 6 if everything uploads correctly. I'll have the link in the description below. So, do think about this in the future. It's not just this bill. This is how do we provide the housing? How do we provide it? The housing we need without getting rid of the housing we want, which a lot of us want, and me included. I live in a single family residence, almost not even big enough for a family because it's only 1 bedroom. I'm going to be looking to get into a different single family residence. But you got to have all of these options, and this opens up more of those options. So, until then, you all take care.